Hare Krishna, dear devotees. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Welcome to ISKCON Farmington Hills Srimad Bhagavatam class. We are very fortunate to have with us His Grace Chaturatma Prabhuji. Chaturatma Prabhuji is one of the senior disciples of Srila Prabhupada. Prabhuji joined ISKCON in 1973 in St. Louis, Missouri. And the very next year, he started heading the department of deity worship in St. Louis. The deities are Sri Sri Nithai, Gaur and Nataraj. And since then, Prabhuji has been in charge of deity worship. He has been head pujari in many, many temples, Dallas, Houston, so many temples, and of course, Radha Damodar bus parties too. And Prabhuji also served as temple president of ISKCON Alachua, New Ramanreti. And those of you, Prabhuji is very well known in ISKCON. Those of you who have been to Sadhu Sangha, you might have definitely seen Prabhuji. He is the MC there. Such a vibrant personality. And not only that, Prabhuji also travels with His Holiness Indradumna Maharaj and Badahari Prabhu in Poland tour, Russia, Ukraine, India. And Prabhuji has a deep love for holy names, very deep love for the Vrindavan Dham. As soon as you talk to Prabhuji, somehow you'll be reminded of Govardhan Dham. He's also very well known for his classes on Vaishnava Acharyas. He has done extensive research and gave many, many seminars, classes, interviews on the lives of our great Vaishnava Acharyas. And Prabhuji is very expert in performing yajnas, samskaras, and deity worship. His perfection and organization inspires everyone. He is very vibrant, colorful, and also very, very energetic personality. Now, as soon as you associate with Prabhuji, you will be enthused and inspired with Krishna consciousness. And we are very, very grateful to have with us His Grace Chaturatma Prabhuji. And Chaturatma Prabhuji currently lives in Alachua, Florida with his family, Pashupati Mataji. Prabhuji has 3 grown-up children. Thank you, Prabhuji. Now, please enlighten us in Srimad Bhagavatam. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. His Chaturatma Prabhuji ki Jai.
Hare Krishna.
We welcome Chaturatma Prabhuji with 3 loud Hari Bols. Hari
Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol.
Thank you, Prabhuji. We are very grateful to have you here. Just a quick note. Those of you following Prabhuji on Facebook, you would be aware that Prabhuji just had a knee surgery recently, just few days ago. But despite his painful recovery, he has immediately agreed and graciously agreed to, enlighten us Srimad Bhagavatam. We are very, very grateful to you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. What's that they say? The flowery words of the Vedas, the flowery words of your introduction. I'm looking around the room to see where that person is. But it's a wonderful opportunity to speak with devotees from all over the world. I was just reflecting with someone yesterday that the personality of Kali, she saw the expansion of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sankirtan movement and thought very hard, how can I restrict this? So she introduced this COVID virus and no one can travel now. And she thought to herself, now I have done it. Little did she know that the devotees of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu cannot be stopped. Just as when the Chandkazi issued his order that no one can do Sankirtan, everyone did. So Maya entered in to try and stop all the devotees from their Sangha in person. And they said, okay, we have other means in this age. And thus the share profits of the Zoom company have gone through the roof. So thank you very much. We'll just dive right into things here. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We're reading today from Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, 8th chapter, verses 8 and verses 9. The conversations are taking place between Maitreya and Vidura. Sankhyanaya paramaham samukyo Vivakshamono Bhagavad Vibhuti Jagatta Soshmad Guru Ved Vinaya Parasharayata Brihaspaticha Provacha Mayam Sadayalu Ukto Muni Pulashtena Purana Adyam Soham Tavaitat Katayami Vasta Shradha Lave Nityam Anuvrataya. Translation to verse 8. The great sage Sankhayana was the chief amongst the transcendentalists, and when he was describing the glories of the Lord in terms of Srimad Bhagavatam, it so happened that my spiritual master, Parashara and Brihaspati, both heard him. Translation to text 9. The great sage Parashara, as aforementioned, being so advised by the great sage Pulastya, spoke unto me the foremost of the Puranas, the Bhagavatam. I shall also describe this before you, my dear son, in terms of my hearing, because you are always my faithful follower. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The great sage of the name Pulastya is the father of all demoniac descendants. Once upon a time, Parashara began a sacrifice in which all the demons were to be burnt to death because his father had been killed and devoured by them, one of them. The great sage Vasishta Muni arrived at that sacrifice and requested Parashara to stop the deadly action. And because of Vasishta's position and respect in the community of sages, Parashara could not deny the request. Parashara, having stopped the sacrifice, Pulastya, the father of the demons, appreciated his Brahminical temperament and gave the blessing to him that in the future he would be a great speaker of the Vedic literatures called the Puranas, the supplements of the Vedas. Parashara's action was appreciated by Pulastya because Parashara had forgiven the demons out of his Brahminical power of forgiveness. Parashara was able to demolish all the demons in the sacrifice, but he considered demons are so made that they devour living creatures, men and animals. But why on that account should I withdraw my Brahminical qualification of forgiveness? As the great speaker of the Puranas, Parashara first of all spoke on the Srimad Bhagavatam Purana, because it is the foremost of all Puranas. Maitreya Muni desired to narrate the same Bhagavatam he had heard from Parashara, and Vidura was qualified to hear it because of his faithfulness and his following the instructions received from superiors. So Srimad Bhagavatam was being narrated from time immemorial by disciplic succession, even before the time of Vyas. The so-called historians calculate the Puranas to be only a few hundred years old, but factually the Puranas existed from time immemorial, before all historical calculations by the mundaners and the speculative philosophers. Om Jnana Timirandasya Janan Jana Shalakaya Chaksu Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Guruve Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangumlam Jayate Girim Yakripa Tamaham Vande Sri Gurum Dinitarino Avanchakalpatirubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bahevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, here we are in this section of the Bhagavatam that it's like, if you'll forgive the phrase, onion. Now, of course, dietarily, as Vaishnavas, we have nothing to do with onions. But we can certainly use the onion as an appropriate analogy. This section of the Bhagavatam is being presented by Maitreya Rishi to Vidura. Now, Of course, we know that Vidura is no novice on the path of bhakti. He is a very well-known devotee and very wonderful pastime, of course, that we all know between he and Krishna. He invited Krishna, of course, to his home for prasadam. Krishna came and he was filled in so much ecstasy, so much devotion. He was preparing a banana preparation, and out of his great ecstasy, he mistakenly gave the banana peels to Krishna instead of the banana fruit. And Krishna very happily accepted this. Now, I don't know how many of you have either intentionally or accidentally eaten a banana peel. It is not a very pleasant taste. It's not something that you want to do a second time. But in this example, Krishna accepted those banana peels because of the overwhelming love that Vidura had for him. In that famous song, it's noted this is the qualification of the pujari, to have great love for Krishna. This is why it's understood that we have properly trained cooks who are preparing the foodstuffs for the deities. Otherwise, we find that Krishna may have to accept the love of the preparation and not necessarily taste the preparation itself. Maybe you've been in a circumstance once or twice, or hopefully never, where the cook mistakenly added salt instead of sugar. There was that famous example in, I think it was Los Angeles, many years ago. The Charnamrita had salt mistakenly put in it. And when Prabhupada tasted it, he became very upset. He was not very happy about this at all. This is inattentive. This is not being thoughtful, not being conscious of what one's doing in the service of the Lord. So in this way, we find that it's very important, the consciousness one has when preparing something for Krishna. So this famous story is there about Vidura. At any rate, we understand he's a very famous personality as well. So the involvement of Vidura and Maitreya are practically on an equal level. But for the sake of this conversation, there is a spiritual hierarchy, if you will. So we look at this process of our own hearing of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and it's coming through a variety of personalities over thousands of years. Prabhupada finishes the statement mentioning how long the Bhagavatam has been around. We'll approach that subject a little bit later. But here in this verse, Maitreya, he confirms his own process of hearing the Bhagavad Purana, and it's clearly in a disciplic succession. This principle is one of the most important and one of the most fundamental principles that we learn in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, the very essential importance of this. These 3 verses at the beginning of chapter 4, I'll read them here. The personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna said, I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god Vivishwan. And Vivishwan instructed it to Manu, the father of mankind. And Manu, in turn, instructed it to Ishvaku. The supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession, and saintly kings understood it in that way. But in the course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it is appears to be lost. Appears, isn't lost, but appears to be lost. That very ancient science of the relationship with the Supreme is today told by me to you because you're my devotee as well as my friend and can therefore understand the transcendental mystery of this science. So, very beginning of our training in Krishna consciousness there in Bhagavad Gita, it's stressed the importance of this disciplic succession. And at the same time, Maitreya notes that this process that he's mentioning it was also followed by his own spiritual master and by other associates that happened to be there. He mentions Brihaspati, as they heard from Sankhayana. And Sankhayana is described as one of the best of the transcendentalists. there's actually, aside from this mention of this personality, there's very little in the Vedic encyclopedia about him. I did some research trying to find about his background and history, and there's very little there. But I think it's sufficient that we look at the Sanskrit words used to describe him in this case, Paramahamsaya Mukhya, that he's the chief of the transcendentalists. That alone is sufficient for us, when spoken by these great personalities of the Bhagavatam's history, to describe one of the speakers, to let us know that this is somebody we should be attentive to, that we should be hearing from. So that says a lot, just those words. Paramahamsa Mukhya. Mukhya, one who speaks, a Paramahamsa, the topmost of one who speaks the Bhagavatam. So we have Lord Sankarshan. He's speaking to Sanat Kumar. Sanat Kumar is speaking to Shankayana. Shankayana is speaking to Parashara and Brihaspati. This was heard by Maitreya, who is now speaking to Vidura. This is the succession that this explanation that we're hearing in this third canto of the Bhagavatam is manifesting through. And that kind of gives us a clear understanding of the personalities involved in this particular line of speaking the Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, in the second verse for today, verse number 9, which actually has a nice purport, there's a very nice bit of an explanation about the subtlety of the relationship between the disciple and the guru. This is a very valuable insight for us, and I want to touch on that point in just a moment. But first, I'd like to look a bit at the history of the persons mentioned in this verse. Now, Parashara, he's noted here. He's got a very interesting background in his life, if you will. He's the grandson of Vashishta Muni. Vashishta Muni, of course, a very great personality. And he's the father of Vyasadeva. So, very good family lineage right there. He is the son of Maharshi Shakti. And when he was in the womb of his mother, he heard the Srimad Bhagavatam. And his mother was actually, at that time in history, it was common, but she was quite young, 12, 13 years old. And as she carried Parashar in her womb, from the conversations, we know this familiar story with Narada Muni as well, and Prahlad Maharaj, of him hearing the Bhagavatam while he was within the womb. This is something we commonly see in our own ISKCON society when a lady is pregnant, regularly reading to the child in the womb, making sure that there's kirtan, because this transcendental sound vibration is not limited to the external bodily features. It's not that one has to only be sitting there with their two ears and be able to hear. Even from within the womb, the sound vibration penetrates. Sound vibration, we know, is very subtle, and it has the ability to penetrate many different layers. Interesting story. In the Skirmerhorn Brooklyn Temple in New York, the temple was, the building the temple's in just happens to be right above the A line of the New York subway system. And the A line there at the Skirmerhorn Hoyt stop is one of the busiest, and it's the first stop there in Brooklyn. So regularly, you would be sitting in the temple room for the class, or, in the kirtan or anything, and you would hear the subway rumbling underneath. Now, it wasn't directly underneath the floor. It was several stories down. But this is the nature of sound vibration. It can penetrate so many different apparent physical obstacles. Similarly, this is the case with the child in the womb. So the ability for the child in the womb to hear is not restricted by their being present in the womb. And this is evidenced by the story of Parashara, who understood the Vedas while he was in the womb. Now, at some point later in his life, a demon, Kalmaspada, Kalmaspada was the demon, and he killed Parashar's father. And as it mentions in the verse, not only did he kill, in the purport, not only did he kill him, but he devoured him. Now, it's one thing in our modern society, killing of personalities, other people, is unfortunately quite a common thing. Murder rates in many of our large cities are quite significant, but we don't see that those persons are devoured by the individual that killed them. This is something that's exclusive to the Rakshasas. And so these Rakshasas, they, as mentioned in the verse, they devour human beings, they devour animals, they devour all types of creatures. So after killing Parashar's father, they devoured him. Now, this angered Parashar to the degree that he wanted to do something about it. And being an extremely powerful devotee with great mystic abilities, he decided to do a sacrifice, a jaga, if you will. And he wanted to have one goal in this jaga, and that was to to demolish, to destroy the entire race of the Rakshasas. His purpose was that, the way it goes when a homa is done, the final oblation into the fire is when one seeks the result of why they're performing this sacrifice. So his goal was at the culmination of the sacrifice, all the Rakshasas will be destroyed. Nowadays, we can hardly find a Brahmin that can chant the proper mantras in a simple jaga, what to speak of a jaga whose goal, whose culmination is to annihilate an entire race of entities just by their words and actions. So he was restrained in this, though. Before he reached that point of culminating this ceremony, Vashishta Muni came. And Vashishta Muni arrived and encouraged him that this is not the proper thing to do. This mood of anger and revenge that you have, this is not the proper thing to do. We can just imagine the mood Parashara had. His father is killed, devoured by these demons. He's got the ability. So with that ability, you want to do something to right this wrong. So what will I do? I'll destroy the entire race. I can do that. I have that potency. So as he was in this way, Vashishta encouraged him. No, this isn't Brahminical activity like this to take revenge. You shouldn't do like this. Vashishta himself was so respected as a sage that just by his presence and instruction in this regards, Parasara listened. He couldn't deny that request of Vashishta and the fact that he was his grandfather. The grandfather comes and asks you to do something. Prabhupada always says the grandfather is more kindly disposed than the father. So if the grandfather comes and makes some request, how can you turn it down? So all of those factors played into it. Now, it's worth noting that Parashara, while being able to destroy all the demons, he thought to himself when Vashishta corrected him, and this is quoted in the purport, quote, "The demons are so made that they devour living creatures, men, and animals. But why on that account should I withdraw my Brahminical qualification of forgiveness?" So from the instruction of Vashishta, he began to be introspective. This is a very important and one of the single most important qualities for advancing in spiritual life. Actually, these two issues. One, to hear from others and take instruction, and two, to be introspective about one's own nature, about one's own consciousness, about one's own activities. And he reviewed, I'm a Brahmin. One of the qualifications of a Brahmin is to be forgiving. Should I sacrifice that simply for the purpose of doing away with an entire race who by the nature of their race is to kill and devour others? It's not so much an acceptance of what they did to his father, but an acceptance of the fact that this is what Rakshasas do. So because that's their nature, should I give up my own nature, which is to be forgiving? This quality of forgiveness that he drew from himself, that he manifested, so impressed Pulastya that he gave him the gift that because you're looking internally, because you're manifesting this quality of forgiveness at such a difficult time, therefore I give you the boon that you will become one of the great speakers on the Puranas, become one of the great speakers of these literatures. We should note that it's never wrong to extend forgiveness. Without delving too much into our current political, social circumstances here in this country, the mood of reconciliation and forgiveness is essential for the country as a whole to move forward now. There's been so much divisiveness, and we don't need to go into the details of it, as Prabhupada never did, but we can understand from the circumstance, from the example, that the necessity of forgiveness is important for moving forward past a particular situation. So in this situation, the forgiveness of Parashara was essential to move past this mood of revenge and retribution that he was trying to develop initially. And this came from hearing from superiors, from listening to someone more spiritually in touch, at least at that moment, than himself, namely Vasishtha Muni. And then taking that into heart, and as I say, looking at his own motive. Motive is the key factor behind anything that we do. What is the motive that we're performing an action with? So all of these things came together and manifested his ability to forgive. And this is not seen as a sign of weakness. Unfortunately, in our modern culture, to be able to extend forgiveness even in a very trying situation, it's seen as a weakness. It's seen as not the best type of quality to have. But this is one of the basic qualifications of a devotee, one of the 26 principles of the character of a devotee, to be able to forgive. I'm sure we've all had situations in our life. I can think of numerous situations in my own life where we feel we've been wronged. First of all, have we actually been wronged, or is it just our ego? That's one thing. But aside from that, if we are wronged, we have the option to hold that grudge, to carry that grudge, and make our heart much harder by doing so, or to forgive that person, place that circumstance that brought that about to the side, leave it on the side of the road, and move forward in our Krishna consciousness, move forward in our own development personally. So this type of, to use the phrase, holistic approach to our spiritual consciousness is necessary for being able to become more advanced in the path of bhakti. Now, this next point here proves to be a very important point as well, that it mentions here that Maitreya desired to narrate the same Bhagavatam he had heard from Parashara, and Vidura was qualified to hear it because of his faithfulness and his following the instructions that he received from his superiors. So Maitreya himself had heard faithfully and submissively, and therefore the message of the Bhagavatam, by that submissive hearing, stayed within his heart. And that allowed him, in that state of mind, to have the proper mood to disseminate that to his own follower, Vidura. And thus, Vidura qualified himself to hear that message of the Bhagavatam from Maitreya by the same mood. So we see that this mood of humility, this mood of service, is the proper mood that we require to hear the Srimad Bhagavatam. Nitya Bhagavata Sevaya, We're supposed to eternally listen to the Bhagavatam. But unless we have a mood of humility in hearing and a mood of service to that process of hearing, we won't be able to regularly, as Prabhupada said, in a daily way, listen to the Bhagavatam. Now, here again, we can refer back to the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where this mentality of listening, of hearing, is very clearly explained. Of course, we all know the verse. Just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. Inquire from that spiritual master submissively and render service unto that spiritual master. The self-realized soul can impart knowledge unto you because they have seen the truth. So accepting, as Parasara did, that Vasishtha was more advanced than him and he should hear this instruction, accepting, as Maitreya did, by hearing from Parashara that he should take this instruction to heart. And in the same way, Vidura, we can also imbibe the message of Srimad Bhagavatam within our own consciousness, within our own heart. This is an example of the sages in the past, and this is an example of our own Srila Prabhupada. When Prabhupada was attending the lectures of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta mentioned, I have noted him, he listens very attentively. So this attentive listening can only be there when one has humility in their principles of devotional service. So humility and service, these are the reward that we get in our process of learning. Now, I wanted to take a look a little bit at the background of these two particular personalities mentioned here, particularly Pulastya Muni. Now, Pulastya Muni was one of the 10 mental sons of Lord Brahma, and he's also known as one of the Shaptarishis, one of the 7 great sages. His wife was a very well-known personality. She was one of the daughters of Kadamba Muni. Now, you might remember that these different children of Kadamba Muni were responsible for assisting in propagating the universe. So his union with the daughter of Kadamba Muni was responsible for bringing about 2 particular species, the Rakshasas and the Kinnaras. Now, these 2 species couldn't be more different. The Rakshasas, as we know, are man-eaters, are all kinds of atrocious activities. Throughout Vedic history, whenever there's some great atrocity, you can find a Rakshasa involved somewhere. And then the Kinnaras. The Kinnaras are the heavenly beings of song and dance that are very elevated in their appreciation of these finer things of life, which would not include eating human flesh, like the Rakshasas. So these are the 2 races that came from this union. Now, not the best of children, granted, but someone had to father them. So this was the function of Pulastya Muni. Now, it's interesting that even though he is the father of demons, when Parashara accepted Vasishtha's instructions, Pulastya understood that this was some great effort, that had he not accepted, the entire race of Rakshasas would have been diminished. So Pulastya appreciated this and gave him a benediction. These sages at this time, because of their great penance, because of their great austerities, because of their responsibilities, they were able to give benedictions. And he gave him the benediction, appreciating that he took a mood of forgiveness. Now, Parashara, he could have taken the attitude, well, all right, I'll stop for right now because Vasishtha is asking me, but this isn't over. We see this kind of mood many times. There'll be some thwart to a person's activity. This is the scenario of film and book and stories where, all right, you've got me for now, but just mark my word, this isn't over. Famous line that's delivered, indicating that the story is going to continue. Here, that was not the mood of Pulastya Muni. He took no attitude of, all right, you stopped me for now, but I'm coming back at you in the future. He completely let this go. And because of this change of heart, because of this change of consciousness that Vasishtha brought about, and that Parashara's mood of hearing was able to manifest, Pulasta gave him this great benediction. And in the purport, as we mentioned, it's noted that Parashar reflected on this. And the challenge of not losing one's own qualities, of not losing one's own nature to achieve some type of revenge is very important. This is a higher type of consciousness. This is a higher type of thinking. And so, in other words, he understood that this quality of Brahminical forgiveness is a better quality to manifest in my personage than the one of anger and possible future revenge for some wrong that I feel has been done. So this is a valuable lesson to us as well. This is a very important situation for us to reflect on. No doubt it's hard. We sometimes feel someone has committed a wrong against us and we want some justice, as they say. But if we have an internal spiritual balance, we can understand that justice may not be melted out by ourselves, but ultimately in the course of universal affairs, ultimately in the course of one's eternal relationship with Krishna, these things will be accounted for. How they'll be accounted for may not be up to us to determine. But we have to have faith that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is behind all actions. And therefore, things will be balanced out in due course. This can only be done by keeping proper association, by serving qualified devotees, by serving those devotees in a mood of humility, by hearing Shastric instructions that will benefit us. All of these things combined can bring about a change in our heart and in our mind in such a way that we will be able to rise to the circumstance of being able to extend forgiveness when the necessity is there. So this is a very important point. Now I'd like to look at these last two sentences that Prabhupada makes in this purport. And I quote, "So Srimad Bhagavatam has been narrated from time immemorial by the disciplic succession, even before the time of Vyasadeva. The so-called historians calculate that the Puranas are only a few hundred years old, but factually, the Puranas existed from time immemorial before all historical calculations by the mundaners and speculative philosophers. Again, the necessity of hearing from qualified and learned sages and not from those, excuse me, who are mundaners and speculative thinkers, who by their own mental ability try to ascertain what is reality." Excuse me. It may be popular in certain academic circles to develop ideas of when Vedic history has manifested. But as Vaishnavas, we're bound to the words of the acharyas and the sages as to what is the actual fact and what is our best interest. So therefore, we take it very seriously when Prabhupada says that the Vedas have been there since time immemorial, that they weren't just created a few hundred years ago, that the Shastra was not just written down for the first time 1,500 years ago, and before that it never existed. These are popular ideas that are out there. Again, this necessity is there to understand the eternal Nitya Bhagavata, the eternal nature of Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, I'd like to close this with just one other short story about Pulasta Muni. It's something that we all know and are very familiar with. His involvement, if you will, in the pastimes of Giri Govardhan. I can barely go through a class without speaking something about Govardhan. So one time it mentions that Pulasta Muni was touring all of the different holy places. And he became stunned by seeing all the beautiful trees and fruits and gardens that were manifested on the son of Dronachala, Giri Govardhan. This was Dronachal's son, Govardhan. There's a whole history to how he appeared, but we'll do that at another time. So Pulasta went to Dronachala, very important difference here. He went to Dronachala, and he received great respect and honor. And Dronachala said to him, what is it that I can do for you, great sage? And he requested, he said, I would like to take your son Govardhan with me to my ashram. I have no wonderful mountains in my ashram, and it's a very wonderful and peaceful place to be able to sit and meditate at Govardhan. Some of us have this experience. So Dronachala was very affectionate to his son, of course, and he didn't really want to give him. He hesitated. Of course, when a great yogi comes, they not only have the ability to give benedictions, they have the ability to be angered easy and give curses. This is the importance of devotional principles, bhakti. Bhakti softens the heart that has been hardened by only austerity. So at any rate, he kind of refused, and Dronachala became very angry and threatened that I will reduce you to just pebbles. He's the king of the mountains. So he said, all right. Giri Govardhan said, Father, I don't want you to be in any difficulty. Just let me go. Now, Dronachala Govardhan requested of Pulasta, how will you carry me? Govardhan was not a small little hill, 64 miles by 40 miles by 16 miles high, quite large. So he said, how are you going to carry me? And Pulasta said, I can do that very easily. I'm a great mystic. I can carry you on one hand. So Govardhan thought, all right, I'll agree to this on one condition. You can carry me. I'll go along with that. But wherever you set me down for any reason, I'll stay there. You won't be able to move me a second time. So Pulasta agreed, no problem. So he picked him up and began by his mystic powers to fly through the sky with Govardhan. This brings to mind that picture of Hanuman with the mountain for the curing of Lakshman. So at any rate, as they proceeded over the width and breadth of India, they passed over Braj Mandala. As they passed over Braj Mandala, Giri Govardhan knew of the future pastimes that would take place there. He was knowledgeable of these things. So by his own mystic abilities, he became very, very heavy. And by the ultimate call of nature, Pulasta Muni had business to attend to in a polite conversation. So Pulasta Muni set Giri Govardhan down where he presently is in Braj Mandala and attended to the call of nature. He came back and he then went to lift Govardhan. Govardhan wouldn't go. The arrangement was, once you set me down once, you will not be able to lift me a second time. This was the agreement. Agreement means two parties accept this as the principle. All right. So first, Pulasta Muni became very angry. You impotent. Actually, no, I take that back. First, he approached him humbly. He said, my dear mountain, he said, please, this was just a simple little thing. I had to answer nature's calls. No, not a big deal. Please, you let me lift you back up. No, we had an agreement. Agreement must be kept. What is a man if his word is not good? Then Pulasta became very angry. You impotent mountain. Because of this, I curse you that you will shrink by the size of a mustard seed every day. Mustard seed, sesame seed, different stories tell it differently. But it was going to shrink. So in this way, Giri Govardhan, by the facilitation, if you will, of Pulasta Muni, arrived in Braj Mandala and was there for his eternal pastimes with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in this way, we see that Pulasta Muni, despite fathering so many Rakshasas, such horrible persons, he was intimately involved in the pastime of Govardhan coming to Braj Mandala for the eternal pastimes of Sri Krishna. So In this way, we see that this wonderful pastime is there. And this is another side of Pulasta Muni, aside from what's mentioned in this purport. So these are just a few words of conversation, of thoughts, of some realizations I had from looking at these two verses in the third canto, 8th chapter, verses 8 and 9, that I felt like I'd share with you all today. I thank you all very much for this opportunity. I appreciate the chance to speak with all of you. And as I understand from Kadamba Kanana, we'll stop now. And if there's any questions, we'll take those and see what I can offer to the conversation. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, thank you so much for the wonderful class, Prabhuji. So inspiring to hear you. There is a question by Nayan Sundari Mataji. Nayan Sundari Mataji, you can turn on your video and ask the question, please.
Hare Krishna. Prabhuji, please accept my sincere and humble obeisances.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much for the wonderful discourse, especially when you touched about the quality of forgiveness. I wanted to ask you that, yes, as practicing sadhakas, we have faith in how things come back, as you, like you mentioned, the universal law, it comes back if somebody has done something wrong. But how do we as practicing sadhakas understand that we have forgiven? I mean, we say that, okay, I've forgotten and forgiven, but we still have that in mind. Though we don't try to take revenge, but how do we make sure, how do we check on ourselves that we have forgiven?
That process of extending forgiveness has to be something that resonates within the heart. It can't just be lip service. Yeah, all right, I forgive you, no problem, go away. You know, we can't do it like that. It has to be something genuine. To do that, we have to manifest the qualities of a devotee. These 26 qualities of a devotee are listed there, and we have to look at these qualities. Srila Prabhupada says on one lecture that I have in my car, I like to listen to it over and over. He says, one can judge one's advancement in devotional life by how much they're manifesting these qualities. So if all I can muster is some false lip service of forgiveness to someone that has done something against me, then I can understand I have a ways to go. That mood of forgiveness, we have to not only forgive that person, but then after that, we don't continually talk about it. Well, I forgave them, but you know what so-and-so did to me? You heard about what they did to me, right? You know, to keep bringing it up. You know, be in a group of devotees and someone speaks this person's name that may have offended. Oh, them. Well, you know what they did to me a couple of years ago. You heard about that, right? No, that's not a mood of forgiveness. A mood of forgiveness means we leave it by the side of the road and move forward. We don't carry it with us. We don't want to carry burdens. We have enough burdens with our own false ego. We don't want to carry burdens that are not necessary. Set them to the side. It takes some practice. It takes some effort. It takes association with others that can help us in developing those. Without very many details, there was a situation previously in my life where someone committed a grave offense against my family. And I, at the time, had a mood similar to Parasara. I was going to write this wrong. Now, fortunately, my wife was the good counsel that reminded me this is not how a devotee thinks. You have to set this aside. It may be painful to do, but you have to set this aside. So we have to associate with devotees that will remind us of our higher nature when we ourselves forget our higher nature. That's how we do it. Thank you for that question. Very nice question.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Hare
Very
Krishna.
grateful. Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, I'm also looking, there are many devotees, families, they are watching in Facebook. I'm looking in Facebook as well if there are any questions. In the meanwhile, I have a primitive question, Prabhu. Is that okay if I ask you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, please forgive me for asking this, Prabhuji. I'm seeing the two sides of Parashara. Like, he's a great devotee, of course, and he also listened to his grandfather Vashishta. Side, Prabhuji, we see Lord's incarnations, they actually annihilate the demons, the Rakshasa. So is it not a service, to kill all the Rakshasas so that the devotees will be, protected all the time? I mean, sorry for this question, but this thought came.
No, that's a very logical question. Very logical question. While the removal of demons from the path of the devotees, from the effort of the devotees to expand Krishna consciousness, may be helpful, it's not our job. Neither is it our job to try and assess, well, this incarnation should be doing that or this thing or whatever, We have to accept Vedic history as it comes to us, and we have to look to it as an example of how we move forward in Krishna consciousness. So while it would have been nice for Parashara to have annihilated all the demons, the fact of the matter is that this material world is a place of demoniac mentality. Especially here on this Earth planet, it's not like the heavenly planet where there's no demoniac influence. Neither is it like the hellish planet where there's no religious influence. Our middle range of existence here has a balance, demons and devotees. So that's there to help keep us on our toes in Krishna consciousness so that we don't fall under the influence and we know what we're avoiding. We know what we're not letting enter into our own lives. So yeah, it would have been good, but that's just not the way things went down. That was for Parashuram to take care of.
Thank you,
Prabhuji.
I understand. And there are... Yes, Prabhuji, please proceed.
Prabhuji, I do have one question actually.
Yes.
Thank you so much for bringing this topic about forgiveness, Prabhuji. You mentioned two-step process in this. First step is to listen from the higher authority, and the second step is introspection.
Mm-hmm.
And this, how do I increase the introspection without, putting my false ego into this? So that when introspection happens, it's only fulfilling my ego there, not actually introspection. How can I increase that, without my false ego into that place?
The only way that we can develop a truly introspective nature is by association. We have to have association with other devotees, both more advanced on our own level and juniors, because this helps us to see where we've been, where we're at, and where we're going. By having association of more advanced devotees, of senior devotees, that helps us look at what the goal is and try and look in ourselves, where are those qualities manifesting? By having association with those who are our contemporaries, it allows us to open our mind and our hearts to each other and review, where am I? What am I lacking in getting to that goal? And by having association with those who are juniors, it allows us to see what can I offer to them that will help them advance while at the same time helping me mature in a way in my own Krishna consciousness. So in a single word, the answer to your question is association.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Certainly.
Can I say something, Prabhuji?
Of course.
I wanted to say that before, but in my eagerness to ask the question, I forgot that we have been very fortunate to get your association. What other times we have seen you is always in Sadhu Sangha dancing and on the stage and, devotees carrying you on their arms. So this is a great fortune that we've been able to associate and hear from you. Thank you. Very grateful.
Oh, thank you. I'm sometimes known famously or infamously for my kirtan antics. I will leave that as it is. All right. So is that it for today, Kadamba Kanana?
I'll just check quickly, Prabhuji. Are there any questions in Zoom? There are no questions on Facebook. Any devotees would like to ask in Zoom?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. I have, thank you so much, Prabhuji. Yes, I was hearing this beautiful lecture from you and we are missing you dearly.
Manga Gopi.
So Could you like to share like your enthusiasm for devotional service so much, like just being around you? I feel like I have not done anything in my life, but it just enthuses me to jump and do stuff. How do we keep up that enthusiasm, Prabhuji?
Well, you know, if you're passionate by nature, which I am, it's a question of channeling that. But here again, as I was answering earlier with this devotee, association. Our personal nature is going to be what it is. But by associating with the devotees, by associating with senior Vaishnavas, by hearing from others, it allows us to hone that personal nature in a spiritual way. So even though I may be a very passionate and energetic individual by who I am as an individual, by associating with devotees, by having good company, by hearing, I can hone that energy in a path that will help me spiritually. You know, that's the only thing I can say. Everybody has a different nature. Mine is just what it is.
Tell them about your mother. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Sure.
We need more of your association to get our enthusiasm up.
I'm more than happy to do any future classes like this that we can facilitate. We'll see what Krishna arranges down the road. But I guess we'll finish for there today.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Thank you all very much for inviting me. It's certainly my pleasure. I'm very grateful to be able to share this introspective look at Srimad Bhagavatam, and I look forward to opportunities to do so with you again in the future. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji.
Srila Prabhupada, all glories to Srimad Bhagavatam. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Prabhuji.
Prabhuji.
Dandavat pranam.
Great Chaturatma Prabhuji ki jai.
Jai.
Pashupati Mataji ki
Jai.
Jai.